Over to you, USG.
Good morning. Good morning to everybody. Good afternoon. Good evening. In my case, good afternoon from Addis Ababa. I have been here on a mission working with our dear brothers of the African Union Commission. So, Abiba, with your permission as moderator, allow me to deliver my remarks. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the first international webinar of the 2023 Africa Dialogue Series. This year's Africa Dialogue Series is dedicated to the theme of market and scale, unlocking industrialization through intra-African trade, in line, of course, with the African Union theme for 2023. Within this theme, this week and today's webinar are devoted to the sub-theme boosting trade facilitation and rethinking the foundations of Africa's export diversification. The title or the subject or the theme of today's webinar, I'm sure you already noticed, is directly taken from UNCTAD's, or almost directly taken from UNCTAD's Africa report for 2022. And it has been done intentionally. As you know, UNCTAD's Africa report of 2022 is rethinking the foundations of export diversification in Africa, the catalytic role of business and financial services. The reason we have linked in a such directly way today's theme, the first international webinar of the Africa Dialogue Series 2023, and that report, that UNCTAD report, was to create an opportunity for UNCTAD to advocate, to disseminate such important report for Africa. I read it, and it has a critical content in designing recovering forward better. Allow me to start by thanking, in a more formal way, the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, the Common Fund for Commodities, and of course UNCTAD, who are our co-organizers of this week's activities, as well as the African Union Permanent Observer Mission to the United Nations. That is actually the Permanent Observer Mission co-organized with us the 30-day program. The African Continental Free Trade Area is the best opportunity for African countries to ensure that industrialization stops being an aspiration and starts being a reality. In turn, industrialization is essential to ensure sustainable development in the continent. Only through industrialization will African countries be able to generate between 14 to 18 million new jobs that the continent needs every year to leverage the demographic dividend. Against this background, economic and export diversification plays a fundamental role for three reasons. First, the COVID-19 pandemic and the ongoing food, energy, financial crisis have brought to light Africa's challenges in building resilience to external shocks. One of the main reasons for this lack of resilience is the continent's heavy dependence on imports. From vaccines to fertilizers and agricultural inputs, over the last 3 years, African countries have suffered once and again shortage of critical products imported to the continent. Economic diversification is an essential step to reduce the dependence from African countries and increase the margin of maneuver in response to future crises. Second, export diversification is the key for African countries to move up in the global value chains. Rather, as everybody knows for a long time, rather than exporting raw materials and basic consumer goods, Africa must integrate upstream into global value chains as exporters of added value products. One way of reaching this goal is to take advantage of the massive market size that the African Continental Free Trade Area implementation will bring about to create scale economies and enhance the competitiveness of African products. The Continental Free Trade Area gives African policymakers a once in a lifetime opportunity of transforming our economies with a renewed focus on industrialization and unlocking the potential of the service sector to contribute to economic diversification through high-tech, high-value added services. We must take advantage of the moment created by the EU Team of the Year and make progress in this direction. Third, export diversification will also reduce African countries' current reliance on the price of a very limited number of raw materials, increasing the number of export flows generated and consequently expanding the capacity of African countries to manage their domestic resources and debt more sustainably. Today's webinar is a great opportunity to hear more in detail about the benefits of that export diversification will bring to Africa and how to advance in this way through the implementation of the Continental Free Trade Area. On behalf of all organizers, I would like to thank you for joining us today and for being part of this conversation. So thank you very much for your attention. Back to you, Abiba.
Thank you very much, USG Duarte. I was reminded by the interpreter that we need to speak a bit slowly. I guess that message was meant for me. But I would like to invite all speakers also to maybe speak a bit slow, like you did, Ms. Duarte, so at least interpreters can follow. Thank you very much, Ms. Duarte, for your remarks. And I agree with you that industrialization needs to be a reality now and no longer an inspiration. And we hope that with this type of discussions, that will become a reality. So I would like to invite Ambassador Bilal to make his opening remarks.
Thank you. Excellencies, dear colleagues. Let me begin by concurring with whatever has been said by USG Duarte. We concur with that entirely. From our side, we'd like to thank you for making this a space available for the Common Fund for Commodities to join this shared journey of trade and diversification. As an organization dedicated to commodities, the first in our list to suggest is to address the chronic issue of commodity dependency in Africa. To boost your trade, the rethinking that you need to do is to turn your weakness into a strength. Here in the Netherlands, where we are based, the Dutch precisely did that when they made water and wind as their formidable strength after fighting with them for centuries. We need a strategic shift for a technology-enabled agricultural transformation in Africa. Commodities are our strength, not vulnerabilities. Nearly 85% countries, 45 out of 54, still remain dependent on exports of primary commodities. So we have to find a way to turn our vulnerabilities into a strength. Second, please try to pay more attention to those who are at the bottom. So please craft a convincing investment strategy for low-income countries to focus on greater differentiation of existing products rather than attempting to diversify directly into new export categories. Before you make chocolate, try cocoa powder or cocoa butter first. Third, please invest in your institutions and in your youth so that they can steer export diversification as a positive trade objective in sustaining economic growth. Fourth, invest in your SMEs so that they can be the vector of change with a vibrant partnership with the smallholders. This necessitates us to activate at least the Secretary General's SDG Stimulus Fund without any further delay. The recently concluded Forum for Development also have a list of suggestions to make finance available for the smallholders and the likes. Excellencies, before I conclude, I would like you to assume that you all are my distinguished guests for a gala dinner. Now please throw away your tuxedo and gown away and come over to the kitchen to identify the source of all you have on the menu. And ask yourself how much you have been paying to those 2 billion smallholders who are putting the food on your table. While you effortlessly tip your waiter for as much as 20% to the person who served you the meal over there in New York, how much did you pay to the very person who produced the food in Africa? I am guilty to the same sin, and it is my effort to sanitize my soul. So please bear with me, bear with the common fund, and please let us work together to make Africa free continental trade area the formidable trade bloc that the world has ever seen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I mean, it's a very nice way of putting it. Those are things that when we go to restaurant, we never looked at, try to even imagine where the food is coming from. And I think this is very good food for thought. Now I would like to invite Mr. Akiwumi to give his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Habiba. And first and foremost, I'd like to wish everybody a very good morning and afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. And secondly, I'd like to thank the Undersecretary General Duarte for this very important initiative, the African Dialogue Series, which we're very happy to collaborate with. I'd also like to acknowledge our colleagues and friends of the Common Fund for Commodities and the Africa Continental Free Trade Area as well, Secretariat. I think this is extremely timely and important as we see globalization is now being reshaped by sequence of extraordinary global shocks and the new narrative of Africa's role today in the global economy is also gaining traction in many fora. Ladies and gentlemen, in recent years, Africa has witnessed significant economic progress and transformation, with several countries emerging as regional leaders in areas such as technology, agriculture, and energy. African countries are also becoming more integrated into the global economy with increased trade and investment flows and becoming indispensable partners in the global economy with their abundance of natural resources, growing consumer markets, and young and dynamic workforce. However, the path towards export diversification, structural change, and industrialization remains below expectation and with uneven outcomes. The lack of financing has become one critical reason why African economies have not yet embraced industrialization or why diversification efforts are yet to bring along sustainable development in African countries. There is no doubt that industrialization is essential for economic development and growth, but it requires large amounts of capital to purchase land, buildings, machinery, and raw materials, as well as to pay for labor costs and other expenses. Many African governments and their partners have been providing loans, grants, and other forms of financial incentives to encourage industrialization. And this includes tax incentives, subsidies, and infrastructure development. The African private sector and foreign investors are, however, increasingly coming into play and financing industrialization projects in Africa. Private investors, such as private equity firms, venture capitalists, and angel investors, have been funding startups and small businesses to get off the ground and expand their operations. Through their financing of industrial projects in Africa, foreign investors have been supporting knowledge and skill transfers that enable African companies to establish and expand industries, create jobs, increase productivity, and improve competitiveness. In 2021 alone, private capital investment reached a record high of 7.4 billion, as Africa Rising narrative fueled investment optimism in sectors such as infrastructure, renewable energy, technology, and digitalization. More than half of the private capital deployed went into African startups and fintech companies, and this is signaling growing global interest for African financial services companies. Africa's growing fintech industry presents a massive opportunity for industrial upgrading and structural change of economies on the continent. In terms of industrial upgrade, fintech can play a critical role in helping businesses to modernize and optimize their operations. For example, fintech solutions such as digital payments, blockchain, and data analytics can help businesses streamline their supply chains, improve production processes, reduce costs, and therefore become more competitive. And fintech can also provide businesses with access to new sources of funding and investment, such as crowdfunding and peer-to-peer lending. This can help businesses to expand their operations, develop new products and services, and enter new markets. Now, securing financing to cover the high costs of entering new export markets or to invest the skills and technologies needed to adapt to foreign demand is challenging for most African SMEs. So fintech could be optimized to secure African firms access to credit and external financing. Ladies and gentlemen, the fintech ecosystem in Africa has evolved and is poised for a giant leap, with investments in African fintech companies reaching 2 billion in 2021. Also, some fintech companies have become unicorns, such as Nigerian-based fintech InterSwitch and Flutterwave, and the Egyptian Farway, to name a few. And if you had an opportunity to see yesterday's Financial Times, you would have seen they had a piece on 100 fastest growing African companies in 2023, many of them which were fintech, but also agri-tech and health tech. Now, fintech lending platforms have made it easier for small businesses and entrepreneurs to access capital, streamline transactions, reduce costs, and increase efficiency, which are crucial for diversification and growth. And leveraging these innovative financial options and technology enablers will be transformative for Africa's journey towards diversification and higher levels of sustainable development. Beyond any doubt, economies and industries are becoming increasingly globalized and digitalized. It is no wonder that technology, innovation, and fintech have worked in tandem in many of today's advanced industrial economies. In these economies, businesses and consumers can easily access financial services digitally. They can market, participants can deploy innovative technologies in a blink of an eye, and firms' business models can be transformed and adopted and adapted to complex and fast evolving environments. And localized ecosystems can act as major building blocks for economic and financial integration. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now time for Africa to follow these global trends. Much of the debate, however, over strategies or drivers of export diversification have focused on the role of the public sector, with limited push towards more dynamic and game-changing agents, such as the private sector and fintech services. Fintech solutions are essential for transforming Africa's exports and overall economies. They can help businesses stay competitive, adapt to rapidly changing or even disruptive environments. Unlocking fintech opportunities and ensuring resilience financial systems should form the fulcrum of Africa's export diversification strategy and industrial architecture. With the amazing young and dynamic innovators and talent base that we have in many parts of Africa, the giant leaps many markets have taken in the fintech space in recent years, I am confident that Africa is set for a brighter and bigger future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Akiwumi. I believe that fintech is the solution or the future for financing industrialization. I would like to now invite Mr. Sibahizi to provide his opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, moderator Habiba. Let me start by greeting all of you. Depending on where you are, good morning, good afternoon. I would also like to recognize the high-level panelists who are here. All protocols observed. I would like to start my statement by mentioning that this is not my statement, it's rather the statement of the Secretary General of the AFCFTA Secretariat, His Excellency Wamukele Mene, who would have wished to be here with us. Unfortunately, due to other engagements, he was not able to make it, and he requests me to be here and make his statement. Of course, he would have wished to appreciate all of you who have spoken before him, and it is a singular honor for us to be part of today's Africa Dialogue Series 2023 that have been convened by the United Nations Office of the Special Advisor on Africa and the African Union Permanent Observer Mission to the United Nations. I would like to also, on his behalf, thank the UN Special Advisor on Africa, Her Excellency Ms. Christina Duarte, and the Permanent Observer of the African Union to the UN, Ambassador Fatima Mohammed, for giving the AFCFTA Secretariat the honor to co-lead with other partners the first week of activities of Africa Dialogue Series. The theme of this year's Dialogue Series, as has been emphasized by previous speakers, is much in line with the theme of the year for African Union. The theme of the year for African Union, which is acceleration of AFCFTA implementation, as you can see, is in tandem with the theme of this series, which is market and scale, unlocking industrialization through intra-African trade. Today's high-level webinar, which is now holding under the theme boosting trade facilitation and rethinking the foundations of Africa's export diversification, is again an excellent starting point for Africa Dialogue Series 2023. Of course, it reflects the immense importance of trade facilitation and export diversification for the attainment of the AFCFTA ambitious objectives, which is boosting intra-African trade and transforming Africa into a modern, industrialized, and influential player in the global arena. Given the importance of improved trade facilitation to this objective, you will recall that member states of the African Union have made a commitment in 2019 to implement all the trade facilitation related commitments that are stipulated in the agreement establishing the AFCFTA. And some of them, I would recall, there are a number of legal provisions that are related to trade facilitation. Some of them are related to customs cooperation and mutual administrative assistance among customs authorities across the continent. We have trade facilitation related activities. We have technical barriers to trade, SPS measures. We have standards, we have transit measures, and all of those that are being done behind the scenes are there to simplify and harmonize trade procedures and logistics, and also expedite the process of importation, exportation, and transit, and also to harmonize standards and eliminate non-tariff barriers across the continent. Of course, there are also elaborate provisions on the mechanism for identification, reporting, and monitoring and elimination of non-tariff barriers. If you go to a platform, AFCFTA platform called tradebarriers.africa, you will be able to see a tool that has been developed to support all the efforts to make the continental trade easier and less costly by helping African businesses to report such barriers and assist in their elimination with the help of government officials, of course. Today, with the current team, we know that we have a number of challenges in global supply chains. Acceleration of the implementation of trade facilitation reforms is more crucial than ever before to ensure that trade can play its role as an engine of growth and sustainable development. Let me quote some of the statistics. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development report estimates that if these barriers are removed, the African economy could gain about $20 billion, which is much more than the gains that we will have as a result of eliminating tariff alone. Because eliminating tariff alone will result in the gains of 3.6 billion, while eliminating non-tariff barriers will result in gains of 20 billion. You can see the difference. We also have some estimations by the IMF, which show that reducing tariff, especially between African countries in different regional blocks, could boost intra-African trade by between 15 to 25%. And however, this effect can double if we look at removing obstacles that make it difficult to trade amongst Africa's region. So you can now understand the role of trade facilitation and elimination of tariff in creating trade on the continent and also boosting intra-African trade. Of course, easing trade between African countries under the AfCFTA will also facilitate the establishment of regional value chains. It will open up access to technology, as has been emphasized by Paul, and also brand names while accelerating export diversification and growth. And diversification, as you may know, is also greatly important for economic resilience. Excellencies, effective implementation of the AfCFTA has the potential to foster industrialization, job creation, and investment, which in turn will enhance Africa's competitiveness in the medium to long term. With the AfCFTA, we are laying the foundation to transform the continent from a state of commodity dependence to self-reliance through African-made products and services. We are building an Africa that no longer depletes her mineral wealth and resources to export to foreign markets, but instead industrializing her economies to give her people a chance to live a better life. This year, the year of AfCFTA, we have an incredible opportunity to further advance our continental integration by accelerating the improvement of trade facilitation reforms and effectively implementing the AfCFTA private sector engagement plan. This engagement plan, which has been developed by the AfCFTA Secretariat, it focuses on developing and strengthening regional value chains in the 4 key sectors, which are mainly agriculture and agro-processing, pharmaceuticals, automotive industry, and transport and logistics. And these sectors offer member states a very good opportunity to use regional advantages to boost competitiveness, diversify product supply, and also export products with a higher value addition, both within the continent and outside the continent. But more importantly, The development of regional value chains will provide a unique opportunity to increase exports of small and medium enterprises through their integration into these value chains. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'm very confident that today's high-level panel will provide valuable inputs in all these areas that we have spoken about and contribute to the effective implementation of the FCFTA. In this context, I would like to conclude by mentioning that it's clear that if we have to follow a common path, we can make greater progress. I look forward to continuing our good work together, and I wish all of us a successful and fruitful dialogue today. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Mr. Sibahizi. And we agree with you that if the trade procedures and logistics are not facilitating, you can have any type of agreement and policies in place, but trading within the region will be quite of a challenge. I would like to now ask our colleague Teresa to play the video for the video message by Ms. Amina Mohammed. Teresa?
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, recent years have taught us a valuable, albeit brutal lesson. We must invest in resilience. Global crises have reversed development progress and stalled action on the SDGs. They have demonstrated that sustainable development is not sustainable at all if it cannot withstand the shocks of our time. So we must turn our attention with urgency to the question of resilience. How do we embed resilience throughout the 2030 Agenda and the 2063 Agenda? It starts with resilient economies. African prosperity must build on solid foundations of a diversified, inclusive ecosystem of economies that are mutually supportive and transformative. We do not have this right now. 45 countries are currently dependent on commodity prices. This means they are constantly exposed to sector-specific shocks. Diversification will be essential for building resilience, creating more employment opportunities, raising incomes, and improving well-being. It is time for African countries to rethink the drivers of their economic diversification and reduce vulnerability. The African Continental Free Trade Area provides unprecedented opportunities for structural transformation and diversification. Through regional integration and the pooling of resources, it allows African countries to overcome the challenge of small market size that characterizes most African economies. There are 3 areas of major opportunity that I would like to highlight in particular. First, we need to invest in high knowledge intensive and technology embedded services, such as communications and financial services. These services only represent 20% of total service exports, yet they hold great potential to enhance value addition on the continent and create viable new value chains. The right mix of services are a fundamental complement to industrialization. By gaining access to cutting-edge services, exporting firms will be able to tap into new markets and reduce costs, increasing the competitiveness of African products. Second, small and medium enterprises constitute the engine of African economies. They account for 90% of the firms on the continent and employ about 60% of the workforce. They fulfill a crucial role in harnessing Africa's demographic dividend. We must take a cold, honest look at what more we can do to enable small and medium enterprises to grow, to transform, and to realize their full potential. Finally, and perhaps most importantly in my view, we have to urgently invest in our women and girls. Aside from the fact that we should fully recognize their rights as human beings, there is also a strong business case for breaking down the systematic barriers and discrimination that women face in entering the labor force. We must also invest in our care economy, set our sights beyond GDP and towards well-being, towards sustainable improvements in the lives of all people, leaving no one behind. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in the midst of great crises, we see great hope and great potential. We have the resources, we have the knowledge, we have the remarkable people. Now is the time to invest at scale in export diversification to build resilient, inclusive economies that empower transformations towards the SDGs by 2030 and Agenda 2063.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to now hand over to my colleague, Christine Awiti, who will be now moderating the second part of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Habiba Benbaka. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, welcome to the Africa Dialogue Series webinar on boosting trade facilitation and rethinking the foundations of Africa's export diversification. My name is Christina Witi. I'm an economist with the Africa Least Developed Countries and Special Programs Division of UNCTAD. I will be moderating this panel. To start with, I'd like to go back to a quote from the Economic Development in Africa Report 2022. As at 2022, 80% of African economies were considered undiversified, being predominantly dependent on primary commodities, exports in the agricultural, mining, and extractives industries. That's 80% of African economies. Now, today, we have three dynamic, highly experienced thought leaders to discuss the topic of trade diversification and economic development and trade diversification. To begin with, I'm going to introduce the panelists, and I will start with Dr. Ruth Mbogori. Dr. Ruth Mbogori is the MD and Chief Executive Officer of Shalem Investments Limited, a social enterprise that is actively working towards commercialization of smallholder farming and providing consumers with safe, nutritious, and affordable food. Through skill, experience, and the favor of God, Ruth has contributed to the growth of Shalem Investments Limited into an impactful social business marketing dry farm produce for over 30,000 smallholder farmers and established a food manufacturing factory that employs over 200 people. And 67% of these are women. And they produce safe, affordable, and nutritious food targeting the base to middle of pyramid populations. Dr. Ruth Mbogori holds an honorary doctorate, awarded by the Breakthrough International University of California, United States of America. A Master of Arts in Organizational Leadership from Africa International University, and a Bachelor of Education degree from the Kenyatta University in Kenya. Ruth is a co-founder of an NGO, Community Micro-Enterprise of Hope Africa, which contributes to charity and support of the vulnerable members of her community. Welcome, Dr. Mbogori.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce Mr. Antoine Kajangwe. Mr. Antoine Kajangwe is the Director General, Trade and Investments, Ministry of Trade and Industry in Rwanda. Antoine Kajangwe is a trade and investment policy professional with the ministry, and he oversees the ministry's domestic and international trade and investment-related matters, and also acts as the ministry's chief trade negotiator and senior trade official. Antoine Kajangwe has a bachelor's degree in history from Oklahoma Christian University and a master's of science degree in international political economy from the London School of Economics and Political Science. Welcome, Mr. Kajangwe.
Thank you.
And our third panel member is Ms. Jackie Mkindi. Ms. Jackie Mkindi is a development manager specialized in agriculture, business, and trade. She is the founding CEO for Taha and chairperson of Taha Commercial Companies. She has been very instrumental in creating and facilitating transformative partnerships with the government of Tanzania and development partners such as USAID, the European Union, UNDP, International Trade Center, the Dutch, Belgian, Finnish, Swedish, SIDA, and Danish governments, to mention but a few. She has participated in a number of trade facilitation and negotiation platforms, particularly on the East African Community, the SADC, ECOWAS, and EU, and also on business issues governing trade relationship between African countries and the United States of America. Ms. Mkindi was recently appointed to serve on the Secretariat of the Presidential Food and Agriculture Delivery Council, advising the President of the United Republic of Tanzania on agriculture and food security. She also sits on the Presidential National Advisory Committee on Gender and Equality, in line with the United Nations government commitment that embed gender equality as a central component of building back better from COVID-19 and fuel a significant and lasting change for generations to come. Welcome, Ms. Mkindi.
Thank you very much, Christine.
Okay. Without further ado, I will start the panel discussions, and I will begin with a question for Dr. Bogori. The question is in the role of services in trade. Dr. Bogori, you work with over 30,000 smallholder farmers in Kenya. In your opinion, what is the importance of the role that business services play in connecting farmers to the market? How has digitalization enhanced service provision?
Thank you, Christine. Good evening, everyone. All protocols observed. I'm very happy to see you, Your Excellency, Ambassador Sheikh Mohammed. Hi. And for record, let me correct, not really correct, but say that Bogori is my father's name. For the last 30 years now, I am Kinoti, so Ruth Kinoti, Ruth Bogori as both my names. I know Sheikh Mohammed must have been wondering whether I changed my name. So thank you, Christine. The role of services in trade, and thank you for notifying the listeners that I am here actually to represent thousands of farmers who are the speakers who have said great things and very knowledgeable information about farming and industrialization. I represent those many farmers, and I represent those many struggling businesses who serve farmers directly. The role of trade services for institutions like us who are supporting farmers is many folds. One is identifying opportunities, especially for smallholder farmers, aggregating their needs, makes it easier for them to access services more affordably, even taking their produce to the market. So aggregating their produce helps them become commercialized. They earn better income for their produce. And as a result, the farmer becomes, the many smallholder farmers put together have a voice. Digitalization is a game changer for smallholder farmers, because through digitalization, farmers can access real-time information that is very critical for production and marketing. Training opportunities are made easier. The information can get them to them faster about like weather changes that they can make to help maybe take care of their harvest. And among other things, just to echo what the great speaker said, payments become easier and less risky. In the past, before we digitalized a lot of our operations, you can imagine farmers who are being paid cash and it was terribly risky. We are so happy that digitalization makes it possible to have farmers paid real time without even having to have very serious bank accounts. And we have also seen banks are riding on the platforms curated, because then they have information, they are able even to lend to smallholder farmers so that they are able to access quality inputs. Even women and youth have benefited a great deal through digitalization efforts that we are able to support them to access. Thank you, Christy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kinoti. Thank you very much. Yes, those are very important discussion that brings out the linkages between smallholder farming and how efficient issues become once you bring in digitalization to do with farm inputs such as weather conditions, through being able to check real-time weather conditions, as well as making payments smooth and effortless. And this ties back to the discussion we had on fintech in Africa. Thank you very much. Now, to move a little bit in a different direction, if we look at trade agreements and diversification, over to you, Mr. Antoine Kajangwe. African countries have had a host of trade agreements which offer preferential treatment, with one of the key aims being to strengthen diversification. Yet over 80% of African countries are still dependent on exports of basic commodities, as per the Economic Development in Africa Report 2020. What are some of the reasons why African countries have not yet seen the benefits of the preferential treatments? Or are these marginal benefits that have taken place so far about to take off on a larger scale?
Great. Thank you very much, Christine, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Excellency Undersecretary General, Mr. Duarte, Excellency Sheikh Mohammed Bilal, Director Sewa Hizi, Director Kiwime, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. It's a great pleasure for me to be able to join you for this webinar today and for this Africa Dialogue series. On behalf of the Ministry of Trade and Industry of Rwanda, it's a great pleasure for us to be able to participate in this very important and timely discussion. Indeed, trade agreements have been signed by many countries on the continent over the last 2 or 3 decades. But this is both an interesting and complex question. Exports benefit abundantly, and the benefits that come from trade agreements are broad-based and cumulative. So it must be looked at broadly than just from export receipts or export figures. And I'll get into what I mean by this. But I think the speakers that have spoken before us have helped to set the stage very well. The recent Economic Development for Africa report rightly shows part of this benefit that comes from trade agreement. And when you look at Rwanda specifically, you see that we have progressively, as a country, moved away from being an agriculturally commodity-dependent economy to a mining commodity economy. And that represents part of the journey towards diversification, exports diversification. To provide perhaps even a better example and more context to this picture, Rwanda's external trade sector, for instance, has experienced considerable growth over the last decade, from 2013 to 2022. Total trade, for instance, has grown from $2.1 billion to $7.3 billion in 2022. That's a 240% increase over the decade. During this period, exports have increased by 219%, imports by 229%, and re-exports, or transit of products, by 639%. Product diversification and export diversification is at the core of this phenomenal change. Rwanda's principal exports, for example, such as coffee, tea, minerals, specifically tungsten, tin, and tantalum, have decreased in importance, or as a percentage of Rwanda's total exports. They've moved from 52% of total exports in 2013 to just under 20% in 2022. On the other hand, non-traditional exports, such as agro-processed foods, horticulture, construction materials like cement and iron and steel, have increased from just $82 million in 2013 to over $349 million in 2022. Exports or re-exports also contribute to this goods exchange across borders, but they further indicate the contribution of services exports to the broader picture of trade diversification. Indeed, services exports in Rwanda record a positive trade balance annually, with tourism, financial services, transport, and ICT contributing over $1 billion annually and representing Rwanda's largest foreign exchange earner. So, export diversification, both of products and of markets, is taking place. Indeed, Rwanda's export markets have also diversified, with dependency moving broadly away from the European market towards the East African community, the Middle East, and other regions, both preferential treatment countries and regions to non-preferential treatment countries and regions. And that is what's so interesting about trade agreements on the continent.
Thank you very much. Sorry, just to come in there, I think you've mentioned that this growth, this phenomenal growth that we've seen of about 240% to 2020 has benefited from both preferential trade agreements and non-preferential trade agreements.
Correct.
Expand a little bit more on that, yes.
Sure, absolutely. If you look, for instance, at traditional exports today, coffee, tea, horticulture, for instance, they are new. Principal traditional exports have traditionally gone to the European market, but more processed products, for instance, processed minerals, are finding new markets in the Middle East. Construction materials and agro-processed materials as well are finding markets closer to home in the EAC, East African Community region, and the DRC, for instance. However, this is not, the benefit has not been as resounding as one would have thought or one would have expected. For instance, EAC exports actually declined between 2013 and 2022, whereas imports increased by over 162%. That is EAC imports. Now, the question then becomes, why has the EAC agreement not had a larger impact than would have been expected? And I'm particularly thrilled by the theme of today's conversation, which is boosting trade facilitation. Because when you look at some of the factors that have led to this marginal impact in Rwanda's exports, a lot of them have to do with trade facilitation. There was a recent World Bank update report for Rwanda, which emphasized these points specifically, looking at inefficiencies of the common external tariff for once, non-tariff barriers that stem from discriminatory use of regulations, non-harmonized SPS requirements, complex rules of origin, and also similarity of products exported. Rwanda, Uganda, Tanzania produce and manufacture many of the same products. And so these supply-side constraints, coupled with inefficiencies in trade facilitation, have affected how well trade agreements can be implemented.
Thank you very much. So I think we'll come back to this discussion on supply-side constraints and similarity of products within the East African region. Thank you very much. And in the meantime, I think we'll shift gears a little bit, and Ms. Mkindi. If we look at policies, I want to take a look a little bit at policies that strengthen trade. So as a CEO and founder of Tanzania Horticulture Association, TAHA has been at the forefront in advocating for removal of distortions for horticulture farmers. For instance, the training and development levy on small-scale horticulture farmers. Would you give an example of a success story that has strengthened and ameliorated the working environment for horticulture farmers in Tanzania?
Yes, thank you very much, Christine, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, but also my fellow panelists. I'm so honored to be invited to speak at this very important event. And I'm so very happy to also meet with Ambassador Bilal. Hi, Ambassador. I'm also sitting on the Executive Council of the CFC. So very happy to see you here. So responding to your question, Christine, TAHA is an Apex private sector member-based organization, and we are responsible for horticulture development and horticulture transformation in Tanzania. Our work actually benefits more than 40,000 smallholder farmers every year. But in terms of membership, we actually have more than 160 commercial companies who are actually the members of TAHA, and more than 30,000 smallholder farmers who are the direct members of TAHA. So we have been actually at the center of facilitating or improving business enabling environment for investors in the private sector. And in so doing, we have facilitated exemption of value-added tax, excise duty, but also import duty on modern agricultural input technologies and farming implement, but also packaging material for horticulture commodities in Tanzania. So, but going to the question, what is that one example of a success stories? We have so many success stories, but I'll just pick one. 3 years back, we had what is called the Tanzania Plant Protection Regulation of 1998. And this regulation was actually silent on registration and importation and exportation of biological control agent, which is a very important agro input or technology for production, but also for compliance to market access. So this made it very, very difficult for private sector by then to invest, but also register and produce and also export or import the products for use in the horticulture industry in Tanzania. The law actually, as it was by then, also limited access to that technology by smallholder farmers, but also exporters and other investors. So we really had to build a strong case convincing the government of Tanzania on the need to revise that policy so that we can actually make that technology available for our farmers and investors in Tanzania. So we really had to engage with the private sector, but also the government of Tanzania, convincing the government not only to review that law, but also to create a very efficient and effective system that would allow registration of inputs in Tanzania, as well as, support execution of SPS protocol in the country. So as a result, we're very happy that we were able to actually attain the objective of that mission. And as we speak today, the government of Tanzania has actually enacted a completely new law. It was not only about revising the plant protection regulations, but we finally ended up enacting a completely new law, which is now called the Tanzania Plant Health and Pesticide Act of 2020. And as a result of that law, we also managed to convince the government of Tanzania to merge two organizations that were actually responsible for plant health support to the horticulture industry in Tanzania. So we merged Plant Health Service as well as an organization that was responsible for pesticide registration in Tanzania. As we speak today, we have a national plant protection organization that is up and running, and we have actually streamlined the support service to our farmers and exporters when it comes to SPS compliance and market access compliance. But also we have streamlined and created efficiency system for registration, for production, export and importation of biological control agency into Tanzania, but also pesticides and other organisms that are used on farms, but also to our neighboring countries. In so regard, we have actually helped the industries to reduce the operation costs in the country. So that is one of our very good example of how TAHA and other private sector organizations are actually engaging with the government of Tanzania in actually driving solutions that would actually facilitate trade and also export from Tanzania to the global markets.
Thank you very much. And just to, if we stay on this point, and I think I want to come to the second question, because this is a very important point and it ties to the second question for you, Ms. Mkindi.
Yeah.
The private sector, TAHA is a facilitator between the private sector and the government and provides important feedback, a very important feedback loop, you know, that ensures that policies benefits the horticulture farmers. So if we look at this, in another direction, and this ties to the points that were made earlier by USG Christina Duarte. COVID, the recent multiple crises, you know, COVID-19, for example, and climate change have had adverse impacts on trade and especially for the agriculture sector. So what are some of the steps the horticulture sector in Tanzania is taking to strengthen resilience to future shocks? How do you link this together with you know, government policy, and how would this evolve to ensure that horticulture farmers are protected against future shocks?
Oh, thank you very much, Christine. Actually, I want to echo what Her Excellency Madam Christine mentioned, but also other speakers. It is true that the challenges are there and we are actually at the receiving end. We are seeing the food system being affected by the number of shocks, but also markets being distorted by the Ukraine war, and of course, due to other factors related to macro economic factors. So what is it that we do? We've come to realize that, you know, addressing some of these big challenges, you cannot do it alone. You need partnership. And it requires, so the private sector alone cannot actually address some of these challenges, neither the government or the development partners. So one of the interventions and one of the efforts that we are trying to implement as TAHA is to, one, mobilize partnerships, public-private partnership, practical partnership, so that we can actually be able to mobilize the resources, but also technical expertise that will enable us engage with our farmers, with exporters in driving solutions to the challenges. So that is one. So defining partnerships, identifying partnerships, and make sure that the partnerships that we have are actually working and they're actually driving the solution that we were looking for. That is one. But secondly, look at the Ukraine war. The horticulture industry in Tanzania is one of the sectors that have been badly impacted by the war, because before the war we had actually secured serious market for spices, ginger, and other commodities. But that has been distorted because of the war. So what is it that we are doing? One, we are doing aggressive efforts to unlock market opportunities, identifying other markets with huge potential. And in so doing, we've been working very, very closely with the government and international embassies to actually identify other markets like in China, India, Africa, and also EU. So that is one of the interventions that TAHA is actually implementing. Another area that we're actually doing or focusing on is defining programs or implementing programs that are geared towards building capacity, creating awareness to our actors on the ground on mitigation and adaptation measures of the climate shocks, for example, but also initiatives that will help us and our farmers adopt new technologies that are working at the challenging environment now. Because we have come to our senses that, for example, the seeds, the technologies that used to give us very good results 3 years ago are not yielding us the same results now. So we are actually on the ground, driving solutions, driving technology, exposing farmers to new ways of doing things, new ways of engaging on the ground, so that they are able to actually mitigate and adapt to the changes. We are also very serious, and this is the last one, on actually identifying policy and trade facilitation challenges so that we can make sure that the technologies that are required for our market are affordable, but also they are available. So creating enabling environment so that our farmers can, yes, access technology at, affordable rates. That is one of the factors or initiatives that TAHA is trying to actually implement in collaboration with the government and other development partners on the ground.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mkindi. So just to, again, bring out this point on these 2 points on supply side constraints. The first is access to technology, and the second is resilience of farm products. And with this, I think I want to come back to you, Mr. Kajangwe, and to bring in the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. So as chief negotiator of Rwanda, in your opinion, what are the 3 key aspects of the AFCFTA that make it unique and stand out from other preferential trade agreements that countries or regions within Africa have with other regions from outside of Africa? What are the, in just 3 key benefits of the AFCFTA that you can foresee?
Sure. So I'll also just limit it to 3. I think first and foremost is that the AFCFTA, of course, as you well know, is the largest free trade agreement since the WTO, the formation of the World Trade Organization. This is really in terms of members participating in this free trade agreement. To date, those are 54 member states, 46 of them who have ratified the agreement. So the political will is there on the continent to establish a very significant free trade agreement. And of course, with this scale comes, of course, a large GDP per capita, or a large GDP, cumulative GDP of member states of $3.4 trillion US, and market size as well, looking at 1.2 billion people. If I can take the East African community as an example, it's a population of 300 million with the recent admission of DRC, and a GDP of 250 billion US. So the scale of the AFCFTA helps it to stand apart. In addition to that, I think the AFCFTA incorporates the largest grouping of members with similar economic characteristics. And what I mean by this, a lot of the members are LDCs, least developed countries, or lower to middle income economies. And so the disparity that is often seen between trade agreements, preferential trade agreements between the global south and the global north are mitigated. And the asymmetrical trading relationships are also mitigated. Second, the AFCFTA is a comprehensive trade agreement. It covers not only trade in goods, but trade in services, investment, intellectual property, competition, digital trade, women and youth in trade, many protocols that are much more expansive than traditional free trade agreements or economic partnership agreements that we see that the continent has signed with other trading partners. And then finally, flexibility of provisions. If you look at the AFCFTA as it's being negotiated today, matters on rules of origin, standardization, TBT and SPS measures, they're formulated and negotiated in a way that they address and respond to the small and medium-sized enterprises that we have on the continent. And so these factors help to put the AFCFTA in a completely isolated and unique position compared to other free trade agreements currently on the continent. Thanks.
Thank you very much for those points. And I think at this point, I have one last question for Dr. Kinoti. So as Mr. Kajangwe has said, so AFCFTA is a unique agreement that opens up opportunities for African countries, for the 54 African countries. And Shalom Investments plays an important role by taking away certain aspects of business, such as connecting farmers to the markets. And in this case, hopefully to the AFCFTA market, so to the 54 African countries. It will be able to connect farmers to the 54 African countries soon. Essentially, that ensures that farmers can be farmers without having to worry about how to get long-term contracts, for example. Have you seen any changes in innovation or increase in yields amongst farmers where they are left to concentrate on farming and not to do everything along the supply chain, not just farming, but also go to look for markets by themselves? Sorry, I think you're muted, Dr. Kinati. Yes, we can hear you now. We can hear you.
Looking a hope in us. Yes, we hope to move to all the African countries, and listening to my sister Habib and our brother from Rwanda, I think there is a lot that we can do together. For Shalem and other SMEs working in this space, having the farmers back is a great comfort for them. Giving them guaranteed markets encourages them to produce. We have seen improved resilience to the climate shocks, a reduced vulnerability to price volatility, and all the other risks associated with the uncertainty of producing without knowing where to sell. We have seen a lot of uptake of climate smart technologies, which means there is improvement in productivity, higher yields resulting to better standards of living, better quality of raw materials supplied to our factories, and then higher yields also resort to higher volumes of climate smart foods, higher volumes of business for us as SMEs. Informed choices also in terms of seed, in terms of inputs, in terms of when to do what, all resort to better changes. We are truly grateful to agencies or development partners like Common Fund for Commodities, because Common Fund for Commodities gives us their back. They support SMEs in areas they need to be able to industrialize. We are a manufacturing company now because of the support of the Common Fund for Commodities. Having them caring enough to give us finance without such serious collateral, and working with us to give us technical support to ensure that we are able to make use of that money appropriately and not be choked by the growth, because sometimes we have seen SMEs receiving support and they're getting choked because they do not know how to go to the next level. So echoing or hearing the great words of Mr. Akiwumi, Christine Doty, and all the other speakers, I feel very encouraged that we have a lot of hope because we are making steps in the right direction. So Christine, there's a lot to say, but I would rather receive a question so that I am more relevant than just saying a lot, because there's so much to say. I'm personally most excited, honestly, to listen to information that gives us hope, that tells us that the little things we are doing as smallholder farmers and as businesses supporting smallholder farmers, there is a lot of hope.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kinoti. And I think this is just, we're right in time for a round of questions. I see that we have 4 questions on the 3 questions on the chat box. I will read them out. The first one is from James Mugo, who's a student at the University of Nairobi in Kenya. And his question is on land policy. Majority of women don't own land. There are challenges in funding, access to market, and education of agriculture and food safety handling. I think this is just a comment, but I think we'll pass it on to the panelists. The second one is from Sanya Wandera, and the question is, which policies have enabled Rwanda to increase its exports? is it possible to have or to highlight the trends of decent employment in agriculture and agro-processing sectors? I think it's just these two questions for now. The first question, I think I'll open it up to the panelists. The second question is, I think, meant for Antoine Kajangwe. So, ladies first. We can start with Ms. Mkindi, and then Dr. Kinoti, and then we'll come to you, Antoine, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you very much, Christine, and excited to actually hear very good or receive very good information from our panelists, but also from our excellent speakers, as mentioned before. So responding to the law, to the land laws and all access to land, especially by women and young women, or even youth in Africa, that has been a cross-cutting challenge. I will cite an example of Tanzania, where I think we are the largest in terms of land size in Africa, in East Africa, actually. We have about 44 million hectares of arable land. But if you can ask the question, how much of that land is accessible by especially women and youth, the answer will be that is a long-standing challenge. And this is because of, I think, internal capacity, institutional capacity to actually title, but also map land and make sure that, you know, our women are actually getting access to land. But we've made actually very good traction on that issue. Why? Because Tanzania now is actually revisiting the land laws, and we're actually trying to make it very, very, very inclusive so that our women can also access land. We have, for example, a very big program under the Ministry of Agriculture that is focusing on youth. So we are also trying as much as possible not to focus on women, but also trying to make sure that our young people who are also interested to invest in agriculture are also getting access to land. And the Ministry of Agriculture, in collaboration with the Ministry of Land, is actually at the center of it all, but also the private sector is highly involved. So what is it that we are trying to do? We are also, apart from land policy review, we as the private sector organizations, we're doing a lot of capacity building, awareness creation to our women and youth on the changes in the laws and how the law is actually affecting them positively, but also negatively. So that is one of the interventions that we are doing. And of course, we are trying to tell our people, especially our women, that of course, for today, in today's world, it is not necessary that you own land. So that land becomes yours. You own it so that you can do agriculture. Agriculture is business. You can actually rent land. So this is the knowledge that we're actually passing on to. We are trying to actually give to our women. So instead of like, I don't have land, so I don't own land, so I cannot do agriculture, we are trying to capacity build them and tell them, look here, you can actually rent land and of course do agribusiness. So those are some of the awareness creation, capacity building programs that we actually implement on our youth, but also on our women in Tanzania. But we are at the center of the government initiatives of making sure that women and youth are actually into agribusiness and they're also accessing land.
Thank you very much. Dr. Kinoti, if we could keep this, please, to 1 minute each for Dr. Kinoti and Mr. Kajangwe, as we are heading towards the halfway mark, half past mark. Dr. Kinoti.
Habib has already said it. I would just emphasize, provide market for the women, let them have equal opportunity, playing ground. They will rent land, they will produce, they will make money, finally maybe buy. But yes, if policies can be influenced to favor equality and equity, then that would be great. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. And Mr. Kajangwe, the question on Rwanda.
Sure. Question, how has Rwanda been able to increase in export? So we have very ambitious export targets as a country. We have the national strategy for transformation, development agenda, which sets our targets at 17% annual export growth for us to be able to achieve this. So we have to put in place specific policies to reach this. One is, of course, the trade policy. That's important to be able to provide the right environment. And we do this by ensuring that trade facilitation measures are adequately implemented. If you look at Rwanda's implementation of the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement, for instance, we've implemented nearly 95% of the category A and B measures, just remaining with category C. So simplification, standardization, harmonization, and transparency of trade facilitation measures is critical for export development. Exporters need to know what processes they need to follow to be able to export. Second is ease of doing business. As you may have heard, Rwanda is very strong when it comes to ensuring that there is a conducive business environment for investors to be able to establish. So this means removing red tape, removing bureaucratic steps to set up a business, and encouraging investments in the right sectors. Third is what we call the Made in Rwanda policy, encouraging domestic manufacturers of various products, agro-processed, light manufactured products, to be able to come in and establish local industries, and really industries that meet good quality and good standards. And then finally, ensuring that there's an industrial policy that supports industrial development. Are there enough industrial parks in the country that have the right utilities and support functions for industries? Do we provide roads, water, electricity for businesses to be able to operate? And the right incentives. Can we provide the right fiscal and non-fiscal incentives for businesses to establish? And all of those taken together have allowed businesses to flow into the country, to create jobs, and ultimately to create export revenue as well. On the agricultural trend, maybe just to highlight very quickly, as a percentage of GDP, agriculture has reduced from roughly 33% to 25% over the last 10 years. And we're seeing services and industry contribute much larger. Food processing specifically has increased from 2% to 4% over the last 10 years as a percentage of GDP. And so we're seeing more investments in those particular sectors because of the various policies that I just highlighted. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think one key point that is coming out of this panel discussion is the link between private sector and government, and that it's important that private sector and government work together to come up with the right policies for export diversification. So with that, I think we've come to the end of the panel session, and I would like to invite Her Excellency Ambassador Fatima Mohammed, who will provide closing remarks for the webinar. Just before she comes in, I will very briefly introduce her, read out her bio. Ambassador Fatima Mohammed is the permanent observer of the African Union to the UN. Her mandate is to represent the African Union at the UN, as well as develop and maintain constructive and productive relationship between the AU and member states in New York. Prior to her appointment, she was Senior Special Advisor to the ECOWAS Commission. Her career spans over 2 decades with a focus on peace, security, socioeconomic development, regional integration, organizational development, and project management, both in the public and private sector. Her academic background is in peace, security, development, and conflict transformation, responsible management and sustainable economic, and business communication. She has a BA in environmental design from Nigeria. She's also the founder of the Like Minds Project, a non-profit organization working with vulnerable communities in Nigeria. She's an Eisenhower Fellow and was further honored with the ExxonMobil Distinguished Fellow Award in 2017. Without further ado, Ambassador Mohammed, you have the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that kind introduction. I wasn't quite expecting it, but thank you so much. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is truly a pleasure for me to join you today. I'm having some tech challenges, so excuse me if I look a bit shaky. I'm actually speaking to you from my phone this morning. It's a particular pleasure for me to be able to do these closing remarks on behalf of myself, my office and my team, and of course, the Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, and my dear sister, USG Christina Duarte, and her team. And of course, all of our co-organizers on this webinar, INFAD, Common Fund for Commodities, and of course, the CFTA Secretariat. So on behalf of all of us, I'd like to thank all of our panelists, our participants, and of course, the contributors for their valuable contributions to this discussion. This morning, we've heard from experts, we've heard from stakeholders from across Africa and beyond. And I'm confident that the insights shared here will not only inform, but also contribute towards taking the discussion on our efforts to boost trade facilitation and diversification of exports forward. These efforts should promote regional integration, leveraging technology, of course, and strengthening our institutions for the economic growth and development of the continent. We've not only heard from experts and practitioners today, but also those who have a stake in ensuring that we move forward towards an Africa that can achieve its full potential, especially in the area of trade. Now, without repeating what has already been thoroughly discussed, I would just like to reiterate the phenomenal opportunity as outlined by the DSG in her opening remarks that we have with the CFTA and the crucial role it plays in supporting our efforts by providing a platform for African businesses to access new markets and facilitate cross-border investment. It is also clear that this agreement has the potential to significantly boost intra-African trade and stimulate economic growth. This unique opportunity, which complements existing sub-regional economic communities and other trade agreements, offers a continent-wide policy and regulatory framework for trade facilitation and services, as well as investment and intellectual property rights protection that have not been adequately covered in most sub-regional trade agreements. With the CFTA, Africa can create the necessary policy space to drive industrialization, promote economic structural transformation, while deepening regional integration and putting Africa in a better position to access global markets. We must, however, address the challenges associated to achieving this, and particularly the importance of investment in infrastructure, in digital connectivity, and of course, the development of human capital, as well as the urgent need to rethink the foundation of Africa's export diversification and moving beyond traditional commodity exports and towards value-added manufacturing services. This will, of course, require significant investment in education and training to develop the necessary skills and knowledge to compete in global markets. But we must also invest in research and development to foster innovation and create new products and services that meet the evolving needs of consumers. Moreover, we must also keep in mind that the discussion in terms of the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic is not over. This has undoubtedly disrupted trade and commerce across the globe and has had devastating impacts on particularly women and youth, and particularly in terms of their access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunities. So as we work to build more resilient economies and societies in the aftermath of this pandemic, we must also prioritize the needs of these populations. I will not call them vulnerable because I think they are resilient and they have shown their resilience. So we must leverage the opportunity of these populations and ensure that they're not left behind. As we say in the women's movement, if we're not invited to the table, we'll make our own table and invite others. And we've seen women doing it, we've seen the young people doing it. And this is very much in line with our aspirations 1 and 6 of Agenda 2063 and the African Women's Decade on Financial Inclusion and Economic Inclusion 2020-2030. So the CFTA and all our efforts should continue to promote inclusive socioeconomic development of the continent, and especially looking at the protocol on women and youth in trade. So to conclude, I really just wanted to reemphasize that point, but to conclude, let me once again thank all of our participants for their valuable contributions to this discussion, and ensure that we continue this discussion. This is the first in a series of webinars that we'll be holding throughout the month. And I look forward to your active participation throughout the next few weeks. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much and goodbye. Thank you.